Husband collapsed after wife secretly divorced him to marry his best friend. But what no one saw that night inside their Dallas mansion was the single phone call his driver made to a random number that would change everything. Carter Vance, a man known across the city for his kindness and unshakable trust, fell to the marble floor clutching his chest as the betrayal he never imagined unfolded behind closed doors. His wife, Amelia, the woman he had built his empire and future around, had already signed away his name in court, while his best friend, Jordan Miles, toasted to their new beginning built on lies. But why did the driver's accidental call unlock a secret more powerful than their deceit? Who answered that call, and what did Carter do in the days that followed that crushed them both forever? The sun hung low above Dallas, casting long gold streaks over the Vance Logistics headquarters, glass walls glinting against the skyline like mirrors reflecting an honest man's heart. Carter Vance stood at the base of the building he had built from scratch, sleeves rolled, phone in hand, smiling faintly as he watched his driver, Manny Cole, help a delivery worker whose dolly had collapsed. To Carter, decency wasn't charity, it was reflex. Add 10% bonuses for the warehouse crew this quarter, he told his assistant over the phone. They're burning daylight for us. They deserve it. He said it casually, the way most men might talk about coffee orders, unaware that such quiet goodness was about to become his undoing. Inside the marble lobby, his wife Amelia adjusted her emerald green blazer and smiled at the receptionist, the perfect picture of an executive's wife. Her voice was sweet, her charm flawless, but her eyes flickered with calculation as she scanned Carter walking in. She kissed him lightly, her perfume faintly floral, her tones soft. "Dinner with Jordan tonight, right?" Carter nodded. "He's got that. Merger proposal ready. Might be big for the freight division." She hummed, tucking her hair behind her ear, a move rehearsed so well it could have won awards. She wasn't thinking of freight or mergers. She was thinking of Jordan Miles, Carter's best friend, the man she was already secretly meeting under the guise of consultations. Amelia had learned to wear sincerity like silk. She'd grown up watching her mother practice it, in one mansion after another, marrying richer each time, always leaving when the newness faded. She had once sworn she'd never be like her, yet every choice she made was a perfect echo. Carter believed in people the way some men believed in God unshakably. His father, Harold Vance, had been betrayed by his own brother, but instead of bitterness, he'd taught Carter grace. "Never repay evil with evil, son," he'd said on his deathbed. "Just let truth do the work." It was the only lesson Carter never questioned. That evening, the Vances arrived at the Grand Pearl, a rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. Jordan Miles rose from the table, grinning, his designer suit crisp, charm blazing like a politician's smile. "There he is, the king of freight." Carter laughed and pulled him into a hug. The bond went back 20 years, college roommates, groomsmen, business confidants. But beneath the warmth, Jordan's envy simmered like oil underwater. He had once been the richer one, until Carter's logistics empire exploded in value. What friendships survived between men who measured themselves by success? As the men talked contracts, Amelia's hand brushed Jordan's under the table. No one saw it except the waiter, who froze briefly before looking away. To outsiders, the trio looked flawless. Wealth, laughter, poise. But inside that table's soft candlelight, deceit breathed quietly. Later that night in the car, Carter leaned back, exhausted. "You think Jordan's offers legit?" he asked. Amelia smiled faintly. "He's always been good to us, Carter. You can trust him." Trust, that word. It slid off her tongue like a blade hidden in honey. As the sedan turned toward their gated mansion, Carter's phone buzzed a text from Jordan. "Brother, couldn't do this without you. Cheers to loyalty." Carter smiled at it, showing Amelia. "See? That's friendship." She nodded, looking out the window. Her reflection stared back at her guilt, flickering for a second before pride smothered it. When they got home, she kissed him goodnight, saying she had emails to finish. Carter walked upstairs, loosened his tie, and scrolled through photos of a scholarship he'd just approved for an orphanage. That was his world building, helping, trusting. He never noticed the second phone. Amelia kept tucked in her desk drawer, vibrating silently as Jordan's name lit up the screen. "Downstairs," Amelia answered, her voice hushed. "He doesn't suspect a thing," she whispered. Jordan chuckled. "By the time he does, we'll already have the divorce papers processed and the assets transferred. He won't even see it coming." Her silence stretched. "Jordan, you promise this isn't just about his company?" "Baby," he murmured, "it's about us." But it wasn't. Jordan Miles had no intention of sharing the throne with anyone. Amelia was his weapon, a beautiful, ambitious instrument of distraction. Upstairs, Carter gazed out over the city lights, thinking of how blessed he was. He thought of his father's words, of his mother's quiet endurance, of the many times kindness had returned to him multiplied. He believed the same would always be true. At that same moment, Manny's old sedan parked quietly outside the servants' quarters. He whispered a prayer of gratitude for his employer. "God bless Mr. Vance," he murmured. That man's heart could make even angels proud. No one knew the world would shatter in less than a month. The morning after that dinner at the Grand Pearl, the Vance mansion was unnervingly quiet. The housekeeper had already left, the espresso machine hissed faintly, and the hum of distant traffic drifted through the windows. Carter Vance sat in his office, his tie loosened, scrolling through financial statements. He didn't know it yet, but half of what he was looking at, the company, the assets, even the house he was sitting in, no longer legally belonged to him. Amelia stood by the window upstairs, sunlight washing over her silk robe. She had filed the secret divorce 3 weeks earlier, using a forged signature and the same lawyer Jordan Miles used for his corporate dissolutions. The paperwork was processed quietly through a private clerk she bribed. To her, it wasn't betrayal, it was correction. She told herself she deserved more. More power, more luxury, more thrill. Jordan's voice crackled through the phone speaker. "He won't know until the transfer finalizes. The court letter's under review, and after today, it's done." Amelia smiled faintly. "Then tonight, we celebrate." Downstairs, Carter adjusted his glasses, scanning a document Jordan had sent him, an equity alignment agreement. It looked like a standard partner filing. He signed it without hesitation, trusting the man he had called brother for 20 years. But in reality, he had just signed over the final controlling shares of Vance Logistics Group. Hours later, Carter was driving home when sharp pain shot through his chest. He pulled over, gasping, his vision swimming. "Manny, stop the car," he whispered. The world blurred. The seatbelt cut against his shoulder as he slumped forward. Manny shouted his name, panic flooding his voice. "Sir, Mr. Vance." He called Amelia first, no answer. Then Jordan voicemail. In his shaking, Manny's fingers slipped, dialing a random number from his recent call list. "Please, you'll help, my boss collapsed," he cried. The woman's voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Stay with him. I'm sending an ambulance now." Her name was Tessa Miles, Jordan's ex-wife. The random number belonged to her new line, recently ported after changing providers. She recognized Jordan's voice echoing faintly in the background of Manny's panicked call. "Wait, did you say Carter Vance?" she asked sharply. "Yes, ma'am," Manny replied, trembling. Tessa's heart froze. The pieces clicked. Jordan's late nights, the luxury gifts he claimed were for clients, the rumors she had ignored. Within hours, she had already texted a contact at the county clerk's office. "Check Amelia Vance. Recent filings. Quiet entries." When Carter woke up in the hospital, the first thing he saw was Amelia standing beside his bed. Tears staged perfectly. Mascara smudged just enough. "You scared me," she whispered, clutching his hand. "I'm fine," he murmured weakly. "Just stress." But something in her tone made him uneasy. 2 days later, Tessa arrived at the hospital unannounced. She stood in the hallway, hesitation gripping her chest. She owed Carter nothing, yet the guilt of what she'd overheard in her ex-husband's calls years ago burned in her gut. When Amelia left the room to answer her phone, Tessa stepped inside. "Mr. Vance," she said softly, "you don't know me, but you should." He blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" I'm Tessa Miles, Jordan's ex-wife. Carter's heartbeat steadied, suspicion flickering. Jordan's ex? Tessa nodded. Your wife and my ex-husband are together, and they've already filed your divorce behind your back. For a long moment, Carter said nothing. His world tilted, the air too heavy to breathe. That's impossible, he whispered, his throat dry. Tessa placed a thin folder on his bedside table. Inside were printouts, filings, wire, transfers, notarized copies. They forged your signature on everything. You need to see this before it's too late. When she left, Carter sat motionless. The monitors beside him beeped steadily, indifferent to the shattering of his life. That night, Amelia returned, her expression sweet. The doctor says you'll need rest. Maybe we should hire someone to manage the company for now, she suggested gently. Carter nodded slowly. You're right. He didn't tell her about Tessa. Not yet. In the days that followed, he began piecing the puzzle together. The lawyer Amelia had mentioned, a friend from her charity board, was registered under Jordan's firm. The documents Tessa provided matched his handwriting too perfectly to be coincidence. Every act of kindness Carter had ever shown had been turned into a weapon against him. The bonuses, the trust, the partnership, all of it. But instead of fury, something colder settled in his chest. Calculation. At night, while Amelia slept beside him, he copied the files into a private drive. By day, he smiled faintly, thanked her for her care, and spoke softly to Manny as though nothing had changed. Manny, unaware of the details, only knew that something in his boss's eyes had shifted, no longer pure, no longer gentle. There was quiet steel there now. One evening, Carter sat alone in his study, the city lights reflecting against the glass wall. He played the call recording Manny had made that day. He listened to the panic, the chaos, and then the moment Tessa's calm voice came through. That wrong number had become his lifeline. He whispered to himself, "You both think I'm broken." He looked at his reflection and smiled faintly. "But you've just awakened something you can't destroy." The war had begun quietly in the shadows of his kindness. Carter Vance moved through the mansion like a ghost in his own life. The doctors said rest. Amelia insisted on care. But behind her concern was impatience, a woman waiting for the ink on her husband's ruin to dry. She thought he was fragile. She thought the collapse had broken something inside him, but it hadn't. It had sharpened him. The morning sunlight flooded his study as he sat motionless before a laptop that looked like a spreadsheet screen to anyone passing by. In reality, he was listening to recorded calls pulled from company archives, every transaction, every message Amelia had forwarded on his behalf. He played one in particular, her soft voice whispering, "Transfer the assets to Jordan's holding account." Carter signed the authorization. He paused, rewound, played it again. The proof wasn't just there. It was layered, deliberate, rehearsed, timed perfectly. The same woman who had once tucked handwritten notes into his lunchbox was now practicing forgery on his company seals. Outside, Manny washed the rolls quietly, glancing at the windows. Since the collapse, he had seen more luxury cars pulling into the mansion's driveway. Jordan's black, Mercedes, lawyers, bankers. He didn't ask questions, but he noticed patterns. Amelia dressed too carefully for visits, her perfume lingering longer than usual, her smiles colder. Inside, Carter heard footsteps. He closed the laptop and looked up. Amelia appeared in the doorway, her tone sugary. "You're up early. Shouldn't you be resting?" "Couldn't sleep," he said evenly. "I was thinking about the merger papers Jordan sent. We should have Dana Harlow look through them." Amelia stiffened, only slightly. "Dana? She's a corporate attorney, not family law." "I trust her eyes," Carter said quietly. Amelia's smile faltered, then returned. "Whatever makes you comfortable, honey." She kissed his cheek and left the room, her heels clicking across the marble. As soon as she was gone, Carter exhaled slowly and called Dana Harlow, his father's old attorney. "I need you to discreetly audit every document I've signed in the past 90 days, he said, "especially anything with my wife's co-signature." Dana didn't ask why. Her tone was firm. You'll have it by Friday. That evening, Carter went to see Dr. Evelyn Crow, the therapist his physician had recommended for post-collapse stress. The office smelled of sandalwood and quiet intelligence. Dr. Crow, elegant and sharp-eyed, studied him for a long moment. You don't seem broken, Mr. Vance. You seem awake. He smiled faintly. What happens when kindness gets punished? You learn precision, she said. You stop forgiving people who weaponize your heart. Her words landed deeper than she realized. The following week, Dana called back. Carter, it's worse than you think. There's a divorce decree filed 6 weeks ago, your signature notarized, but not by any clerk I know. Your holdings in Vance Logistics have been redistributed to a shell under Jordan Miles's fund. The transfer trail leads to the Caymans. Carter listened in silence. Then, keep going. Quietly. That night, he invited Jordan and Amelia to dinner. The dining room glowed in candlelight, expensive wine chilling in silver. Amelia wore crimson, her laugh liquid and rehearsed. Jordan arrived late, apologizing with his usual charm. To friendship, Carter said, raising his glass. And to loyalty, the rarest currency in Dallas. They toasted. Amelia smiled. Jordan chuckled nervously. Halfway through the meal, Carter mentioned casually, Dana found some irregularities in my filings. She's running a deeper audit. Amelia's fork froze midair. Jordan cleared his throat. Probably just accounting overlaps. Happens all the time. Of course, Carter said softly, smiling. Still interesting how trust can make one blind. For a moment, silence fell. Amelia reached for her wine. Her hand trembled ever so slightly. When they left that night, Jordan's arm around her waist, Carter stood at the window watching them go. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger burned too hot, too fast. What filled him now was colder, a slow, deliberate flame that never flickered. The next day, Mason Trent, the private investigator Dana recommended, arrived, a quiet man with the blunt patience of someone who had seen too much. He listened as Carter explained. I don't want theatrics, Carter said. I want truth. Every call, every message, every transfer. Mason nodded. And when we have it? Carter's eyes hardened. Then we start returning favors. 2 weeks later, the first evidence arrived. Videos, photographs, GPS logs, voice recordings. Amelia's visits to a downtown penthouse Jordan had leased. Jordan's assistant delivering packages under fake company names. A courier service transferring Carter's corporate accounts to a newly formed subsidiary labeled Aurora Ventures. Carter watched every file in silence, every pixel of betrayal. At dawn, he sat in his study again, the skyline pale through the glass. Manny brought coffee in quietly. Sir? Carter looked up. Do me a favor. If anyone calls asking for financial papers, say I'm out of town. And, Manny, thank you for that call you made. The one during your collapse? Manny asked. Yes, Carter said softly. That wrong number might have saved my life. He waited until Manny left before opening his phone. The last text from Tessa Miles read, They're still meeting. Want proof? Carter typed back. Everything you can find. Then he leaned back in his chair, his reflection split between glass and shadow. His father's voice echoed faintly in memory. Never repay evil with evil, son, Carter whispered to the empty room. I'm not repaying it. I'm perfecting it. The quiet man the city once called kind had begun building something far more precise than forgiveness, revenge, measured to the inch. Carter Vance's transformation began in silence. No one noticed at first, not Amelia, not Jordan, not even Manny. The man once known for generosity now moved with surgical calm, his kindness replaced by calculation so quiet it felt holy. He didn't rant, he didn't accuse, he simply began to build. The first revenge wasn't loud, it was invisible. Using Dana Harlow's help, Carter transferred every intellectual property and patent tied to Vance Logistics into a new subsidiary under his father's dormant holding, HV, Freight Holdings, legally protected through layered trusts. On paper, the company Amelia and Jordan had stolen now owned nothing but office furniture and debt. The empire they'd celebrated was an empty shell. That same week, Amelia and Jordan signed a partnership with an overseas investor, flaunting their victory with champagne and cameras. To the next chapter, Jordan said, raising his glass. Amelia kissed him, laughing softly. To everything he never saw coming. But as the funds cleared, the transfer bounced. The Cayman account froze under a quiet injunction from Dana's team. The message read, pending investigation under Clause 14B, fraudulent dissolution of assets. Jordan panicked, but Amelia soothed him. Relax, it's a clerical issue. Carter doesn't have the reach to stop this. She was wrong. Phase 2 came quietly. Carter's legal department leaked anonymous internal audits showing potential fraud under Jordan's venture fund. The whispers reached the media, then regulators. Within a week, Jordan's firm lost 2 investors. Phase 3 hit closer to home. Carter invited Amelia to lunch at the Meridian Club, a private dining hall reserved for Dallas executives. She hesitated but agreed. He looked calm, even kind. Amelia, he said softly, you once told me loyalty was outdated. Maybe you're right, but ethics aren't. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to sing? You mean? He smiled faintly. Just a thought. As she left, a server handed her the bill on it, a handwritten note, paid by HV Freight Holdings. She frowned, confused, not realizing that was the name now holding everything she thought she owned. Phase 4 unfolded through Mason Trent's surveillance reports. Jordan's assistant, desperate for a payout, agreed to cooperate. Mason recorded her handing over a drive filled with photos, messages, and recordings of Amelia's affair dates, times, payments, even the luxury flat Jordan had bought under Amelia's alias. Carter didn't send them to the press. Not yet. He had better uses for humiliation. Phase 5 involved the board of Vance Logistics. Carter called an emergency meeting, smiling politely as he entered the conference room. Amelia and Jordan sat at the head, confident, discussing transition plans. Carter placed a folder on the table. Before we begin, I think it's important we review the ownership structure. Inside the folder were legal proofs showing the company's transfer to HV Freight Holdings. The room fell silent. One director murmured, "Wait, it means, Carter interrupted calmly, that this company belongs entirely to my late father's trust. I'm merely its steward." Jordan's face drained of color. Amelia swallowed hard. "That's impossible." "Then sue me," Carter said softly. Phase 6 began in court. Dana filed a motion accusing Amelia and Jordan of marital fraud, financial misrepresentation, and unauthorized asset transfer. The courtroom filled with tension as Judge Lorraine Beckett reviewed the evidence. Amelia's attorney stammered, "Your Honor, these claims are baseless." The judge cut him off. "The evidence shows otherwise. Until verified, all joint assets are frozen." For the first time, Amelia felt the chill of loss. That evening, she stormed into Jordan's penthouse. "You said this was manhandled," Jordan snapped. "I didn't know he'd outmaneuver the filings. Who even uses holding trusts anymore? You promised me security, and you promised to keep him weak," they shouted until neighbors called security. The doorman later whispered the scene to a reporter from Dallas Herald. By the next morning, photos of Amelia leaving the building in tears circulated online. Phase 7 struck their public image. Carter's PR firm released a feature titled "The Silent CEO: How Carter Vance's Integrity Redefined Corporate Loyalty." The accompanying photo showed him shaking hands with charity workers, his story reframed as a tale of resilience after betrayal. Comments flooded in. "He's the kind of man we need more of. She left that? For greed?" Each post eroded Amelia's reputation a little more. Phase 8 dismantled Jordan's finances. Through back channels, Carter's contacts in the finance sector questioned the legality of Jordan's fund acquisitions. Within days, his firm's accounts were audited. A week later, his business license was suspended for inconsistencies. Phase 9 was deeply personal. Carter invited Amelia's parents to dinner. Her estranged father, a retired judge, and her mother, now remarried. He greeted them warmly, spoke gently, and halfway through the meal, revealed everything. Her father sat in stunned silence. She forged signatures? I wanted you to hear it from me, sir, Carter said. I'll always respect your family. Her mother's expression was cold. Amelia was always too ambitious. She thought love was leverage. The story spread through every social circle Amelia once ruled. Phase 10 arrived when the affair child rumor broke. Mason's files proved Amelia had been pregnant 6 months before Carter's collapse, and Jordan was the father. Carter didn't leak it himself. He simply let the right journalist find it. Amelia's charity. Board suspended her pending review. Phase 11 through 15 followed swiftly. The repossession of her luxury cars, eviction from her penthouse, seizure of Jordan's assets, a defamation countersuit that bled them financially, and finally the ultimate strike, a public court ruling awarding Carter full control, damages, and moral vindication. The day the judgment came, Amelia sat trembling beside Jordan. The judge's gavel struck. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Carter Vance. The defendants are ordered to pay restitution for fraud and breach of marital fiduciary duty. Carter stood, buttoning his suit, calm as marble. He didn't look at them as he left the courtroom. Outside, the sun glared against the courthouse steps. Manny waited by the car, holding the door open. You okay, sir? He asked quietly. Carter nodded. Better than ever. From behind them, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashing. Amelia hid her face. Jordan cursed under his breath. As the car pulled away, Carter looked out at the city, the skyline he'd once built with trust, now gleaming under new meaning. He murmured, "They taught me that kindness without caution is suicide. Now they'll remember my silence louder than any speech." Manny said nothing, but in his eyes, he saw something wholly justice, tempered by mercy, delivered with precision. Carter leaned back, closing his eyes. The man who once believed in goodness had become its most dangerous version. A good man who learned how to never be fooled again. The world that Amelia and Jordan once ruled began to crumble piece by piece, not with explosions, but with quiet humiliations that struck deeper than any public scandal ever could. By the time autumn swept over Dallas, their faces were on every social feed, but not in the way they were used to. Headlines that once praised their elegance now read like epitaphs. Socialite, couple exposed in corporate fraud scandal, former CEO's wife accused of forgery and infidelity, Jordan miles under investigation for embezzlement and insider collusion. Each article felt like a mirror Amelia couldn't escape. The woman who once entered charity galas to applause now watched guests turn away when she arrived. At restaurants, whispers followed her like shadows. She'd gone from admired to infamous in weeks. Jordan, meanwhile, was drowning in audits, lawsuits, and sleepless nights. The SEC had opened a full-scale investigation. His phones rang non-stop, lawyers, banks, investors demanding explanations. His assets were frozen, his accounts under review, his reputation shredded. You said he was naive, Jordan snapped one morning, pacing their penthouse as Amelia sat motionless on the couch. You said he was soft. Amelia's eyes were red, her voice trembling. He was until we made him something else. Then what now? Her gaze drifted to the window, the Dallas skyline stretching endlessly. Now, he's everything we were too foolish to become. Across town, Carter sat in his newly restored office at Vance Logistics, sunlight painting the mahogany desk where his father once worked. The company was whole again, reclaimed, purified, reborn. Dana Harlow stood by the door, placing the final documents on his desk. It's done, she said. All restitution cleared. The properties are back under your trust. Good, Carter replied softly. Make sure a portion of it goes to the employees affected by their scheme. Dana studied him for a long moment. Most people in your position would destroy them completely. You're choosing balance. Carter's lips curved faintly. Balance is the most painful punishment. Let them live with what they created. But fate wasn't done. The night before the final hearing in Jordan's financial trial, a storm rolled through Dallas. Amelia stood outside their apartment balcony, her hair damp from rain. She looked down at the city where she'd once been queen. Jordan sat inside, a glass of whiskey shaking in his hand. "They'll take everything," he muttered. "The firm, the cars, the condo, the accounts." Amelia turned toward him, tears cutting through her mascara. "We still have each other." He laughed bitterly. "Do we?" She froze. He set his glass down. "You used me to escape him. I used you to outsmart him. We both failed." She stared at him for a long time, realization dawning cold and slow. "You were never going to stay, were you?" Jordan's silence was answer enough. The next morning in court, Judge Beckett's verdict was final. Carter Vance was absolved of all false claims, awarded full restitution, and granted the moral authority of public vindication. The courtroom buzzed with reporters. Amelia and Jordan sat at the defendant's table like statues carved from regret. As the gavel struck, Carter rose, buttoned his jacket, and turned to leave. Amelia's voice broke through the silence. "Carter, please." He stopped, but didn't turn around. "Do you remember the day you said love means trust?" she whispered. "I did love you. I didn't know how to be good." He stood there, motionless, before replying quietly. "You didn't need to be good, Amelia. You only needed to be honest." Then he walked away. Outside, the cameras flashed like lightning, but Carter's expression remained serene. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply got into the car where Manny was waiting. "You did it, sir," Manny said softly. Carter looked out the window as the courthouse faded behind them. "No, Manny. I just stopped letting people decide who I was." Back inside the courtroom, Jordan leaned forward, whispering harshly to Amelia. "This is your fault." She looked at him with the dull emptiness of someone whose world had ended twice. "No, Jordan, this is ours." Weeks later, Carter's company launched a scholarship program in his father's name, the Harold Vance Integrity Fund. The opening ceremony drew press from across Texas. Cameras panned across the crowd as Carter spoke gently to the audience. "My father taught me that trust is currency. I lost mine once, but I learned something. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's understanding what never deserves a second chance." Applause filled the hall. Outside the venue, Amelia watched from her car, her reflection faint against the glass. She had no makeup, no entourage, no cameras, just silence. She could see Carter in the distance, dignified, calm, untouchable. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "He won." Across town, Jordan's penthouse was empty. The bank had repossessed it. His venture firm dissolved, his name blacklisted. He had left Dallas quietly, rumors saying he moved to Houston to start over under another name. As for Amelia, her once perfect world dissolved into exile. She applied for work at a small PR agency under her maiden name, hoping no one would recognize her. Some days she'd walk past Vance Logistics just to glimpse the life she threw away. One afternoon, she saw Carter's car pull out. For a moment, their eyes met through the tinted glass, just long enough for her to see that he felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no memory. Just peace. That night, she wrote a letter she never sent. "You gave me a life of kindness. I gave you a lesson in betrayal, and you repaid me with silence that will haunt me forever." She folded it, sealed it, and left it on her nightstand. Some victories roar, others whisper. Carter's revenge whispered through every corner of the city, a legend of how a kind man, once broken, learned to rebuild his life not through rage, but through reason. Autumn deepened into winter, and Dallas carried the quiet hum of a city moving on. But for Amelia Vance, time had stopped. Her days blurred between the walls of a modest apartment she could barely afford, where the echo of past luxury haunted every corner. Gone were the silk robes, the champagne breakfasts, the camera flashes. The woman who once dictated trends now hid behind sunglasses at grocery stores, hoping no one recognized her. Each night, she replayed the court scene in her mind, Carter's calm face, the finality in his eyes, the way he hadn't even looked back when she called his name. His silence was her sentence. Every word she'd spoken during their marriage, every promise, Every manipulation returned now like ghosts whispering reminders of what she destroyed. Jordan Miles was no longer beside her. His downfall had come faster than either of them expected. The SEC had indicted him for financial misconduct, and after a plea deal gone wrong, his name was splashed across every financial news network. He fled Dallas, leaving behind unpaid bills, frozen accounts, and a reputation that would never recover. Amelia tried to call him one night, not for love, but for desperation. "Jordan, please," she begged into the static. "I can't face this alone." His voice was dry, almost cold. "You wanted power, Amelia. This is what it looks like when it turns off the lights." Then the line went dead. Carter, meanwhile, had become the quiet story everyone admired but few fully understood. His kindness had transformed into something rarer: composure, born of pain. The Dallas Herald ran a feature titled "The Man Who Lost Everything and Built Integrity from Ashes." The photo showed him at a charity gala, standing beside Dana Harlow, presenting a check for a youth business mentorship program. To the public, it looked like redemption. To Carter, it was cleansing. He had rebuilt not to flaunt victory, but to reclaim peace from chaos. Dr. Evelyn Crow saw it clearly during one of their sessions. "You've evolved," she told him. "But tell me the truth. Do you feel free?" Carter paused before answering. "Freedom isn't forgetting. It's seeing the storm behind you and no longer flinching when it thunders." She smiled. "Then you're almost there." But the storm hadn't finished with Amelia. Her final humiliation came one crisp February morning when she walked into a coffee shop near downtown. Conversations hushed instantly. At a corner table, two young executives were discussing Carter's new philanthropic project. "Man's a legend," one said. "His ex-wife tried to destroy him, right? Heard she ended up broke." "Yeah," the other replied. "People like her always think they can cheat Grace." Amelia froze, pretending to look at her phone. The barista took her order, avoiding eye contact. When she sat, her reflection in the window caught her the tired eyes, the fading glamour, the quiet ache of recognition. She picked up a discarded newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Vance Logistics Expands Global Humanitarian Partnership." Below the photo of Carter shaking hands with diplomats, a smaller caption noted, "An empire reborn through ethics." Her fingers trembled. She folded the paper carefully, as though holding the last piece of him she could touch. Later that evening, she returned home and found a letter slipped under her door, an official notice from the court. It was the final closure of all property claims, confirming Carter's full ownership of everything they once shared. At the bottom, in Dana Harlow's handwriting, was a short note. "Closure is a privilege. Few get to earn it. You lost yours when you signed his name." Amelia sank onto the floor, tears spilling silently. For the first time, she realized revenge hadn't destroyed her. Her own greed had. She had loved Carter in her own flawed way, but she had loved status more. Across town, Carter stood by the glass wall of his penthouse, overlooking the glittering Dallas skyline. Manny entered quietly, holding two envelopes. "From the board and from the legal office, sir," he said. Carter opened the first, an invitation to keynote at the Texas Ethics and Law Conference. The second was Amelia's letter, forwarded through his lawyer. Inside, her handwriting was shaky. "I destroyed what loved me most because I couldn't recognize peace when I had it. You won, Carter. Not just the case, you won yourself back. I only hope your silence someday forgives me." Carter read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in his desk drawer without a word. He didn't hate her. He didn't pity her. He simply understood her now, and that understanding was heavier than anger. He turned to Manny, his tone soft. "Sometimes justice doesn't shout, Manny. It just outlives the noise." The driver nodded quietly. "And that's what makes it justice, sir." Outside, the city lights flickered like scattered embers. Somewhere in that endless stretch of Dallas night, two broken souls existed on opposite ends of the same story, one haunted by silence, the other healed by it. Carter raised his glass of bourbon to the skyline and whispered to himself, "For every man who's been betrayed, may his patience be sharper than his pain." The wind shifted against the windows, and for the first time since the collapse, Carter Vance smiled not in triumph, but in peace. The next winter in Dallas unfolded beneath cold, flawless skies. One of those seasons that makes people believe time can heal anything. Carter Vance no longer thought about healing. He thought about closure. Weeks had passed since Amelia's final letter. He had read it once, locked it away, and told himself that some stories didn't deserve reopening. Yet he could feel her shadow everywhere he went, at the corners of news articles, whispered in charity dinners, hinted at in conversations that paused when he walked into the room. He'd rebuilt his empire, redefined his name, but somewhere deep, in the quiet of his mind, he knew the cycle wasn't truly finished. Not until he faced the person who had once known how to break him. Late one afternoon, as he left the new Vance Foundation headquarters, a familiar figure waited by the fountain outside Amelia. Her once polished confidence was gone. Her coat was worn, her hands bare of jewelry. She looked smaller, not in stature but in spirit. For a long moment, neither spoke. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said softly, her voice trembling against the hum of the traffic. "I just wanted to see you one last time. To know if you're really as calm as they say." Carter's gaze stayed steady. "Calm isn't peace, Amelia. It's what's left when peace refuses to come." She nodded faintly. "You were always better at words. I was better at pretending." The pause between them stretched, filled with everything unsaid. Finally, she drew a shaky breath. "Jordan's gone. He called from Houston last week. He said he's marrying someone else." I laughed. He studied her face, the fatigue, the bitterness, the faint, reluctant trace of regret. "You'll find a way to rebuild," he said quietly. "You're resilient." Her eyes glistened. "You still believe that?" "I believe everyone eventually meets the truth they've been running from," he replied. "Mine was you. Yours will be yourself." A gust of cold winds swept through, scattering leaves across the marble steps. Amelia folded her arms tightly, almost shivering. "Do you hate me, Carter?" He looked past her, toward the skyline reflecting gold in the setting sun. "No. Hating you would mean you still own a part of me." She bit her lip, nodding slowly. "Then you've really won." Carter's voice softened. "Winning wasn't the goal. Surviving was." For a moment her composure cracked. "You were kind to everyone, even to people who never deserved it. And I ruined that. I just wanted you to love me enough to forgive the worst in me." He met her eyes finally, not with anger but with something quieter, recognition. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I owe you. It's the peace I give myself." Amelia's tears spilled freely then. She turned to leave, her footsteps echoing across the stone path. When Carter spoke again, his tone low but firm. "Amelia," he said. She stopped, turning slightly. "I hope someday you remember what we were before the lies. That was real, once. Don't bury it completely." Her lips parted, trembling. "That's the hardest part," she whispered. "It was real, and I destroyed it." She walked away slowly, the wind pulling at her coat, her silhouette shrinking into the dusk until she was gone. Carter stood alone for a long time, the fountain's ripples reflecting fragments of light across his face. He felt no victory, just a strange, steady quiet, the kind of quiet that follows the last storm when there's nothing left to lose. Later that evening, back in his penthouse, he poured himself a drink and looked out at the glittering grid of Dallas. Manny entered silently, placing a folder on the table. "Final reports, sir. The Foundation's expansion's cleared. Everything's clean." Carter nodded. "Thank you, Manny. You've been more than a driver." Manny smiled faintly. "You've been more than a boss." When he left, Carter opened the window. The city breeze carried the hum of traffic and the faint sound of distant laughter, life continuing, as it always did. He thought of his father's words again. "Never repay evil with evil, son. Let truth do the work." And tonight, for the first time, he finally understood what his father meant. Revenge had served its purpose, but truth had done the rest. Somewhere miles away, Amelia would wake tomorrow to a dawn that didn't wait for her grief. Jordan would start over in another city, pretending not to remember the empire he destroyed. And Carter, Vance, the man who had collapsed, been betrayed, and risen again, stood at the edge of the skyline, whispering to no one. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to meet the version of yourself that was worth keeping. He closed the window, turned off the light, and let the city fade into silence. The winter thaw arrived softly, sunlight returning to the glass towers that had once witnessed betrayal, collapse, and rebirth. Carter Vance stood in the atrium of the newly completed Vance Foundation Center for Ethical Leadership, a place built not just from wealth, but from wisdom purchased through pain. The marble floors gleamed, the logo shimmered on glass, and for the first time in years, peace felt permanent. A crowd filled the hall, journalists, business leaders, students. They'd come to hear him speak. Cameras flashed, microphones hovered. But Carter's eyes remained fixed on the small plaque unveiled at the entrance, dedicated to all who learned too late whom they could trust. He took the stage. His voice was calm, steady, resonant. "I built my first company believing kindness could fix anything," he began. "And maybe it can until someone mistakes it for weakness." Murmurs rippled through the room. But strength isn't the absence of kindness. It's knowing when to let go without losing who you are. Every word came from truth, not pride. He wasn't preaching success, he was describing survival. Among the audience, unseen by most, Amelia stood at the back, hidden beneath a black scarf and dark glasses. She had debated coming for days. She told herself it was closure, not curiosity. Yet as she watched Carter speak, she saw something she hadn't seen before, not the man she betrayed, but the man she'd unknowingly helped create. He continued, his tone softening. "Sometimes, the people we love become our greatest lessons. Betrayal doesn't destroy good men, it refines them. Pain isn't the end. It's the invitation to begin again." Applause erupted. Carter stepped down from the podium, shaking hands, smiling modestly. He spotted her then, across the crowd, a shadow of a woman he once knew. Their eyes met briefly. There was no hostility, no longing, just quiet acknowledgement. Two souls on opposite shores of the same past. When the crowd thinned, she approached him slowly. "You always knew how to turn wounds into wisdom," she said softly. "And you always knew how to test them," he replied, his tone neither cruel nor kind, just factual, grounded in peace. She nodded. "I didn't come to apologize again. I came to say, I'm glad you became what I never could." He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "You could have, but you wanted to win too soon." Amelia exhaled, a tear slipping free before she turned to leave. "Goodbye, Carter. Goodbye, Amelia." Then he turned toward the foundation's glass doors, where Manny waited beside the car. The driver's hair had gone a little gray since that day of the collapse, but his loyalty hadn't aged a bit. "You ready, sir?" Manny asked. Carter glanced back at the building one last time. More than ready. They drove through downtown as the city lights came alive, the same city where he'd once lost everything and found himself again. He passed the courthouse steps where his enemies had fallen, the hospital where he'd collapsed, the mansion where he'd once trusted blindly. Each landmark whispered a memory, but none of them held power anymore. Manny glanced in the mirror. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't dialed that number?" Carter smiled faintly. "Fate doesn't make mistakes, Manny. Only people do." They crossed the Trinity River Bridge just as the sun began to dip, painting gold across the skyline. The air inside, the car felt lighter, freer. Carter leaned back, watching the city stretch behind him. "You know, Manny, it's strange. She took everything I had, and somehow, she gave me everything I needed." Manny chuckled softly. "Guess God's got a sense of humor after all." Carter looked out the window again, his reflection fading into the sunset. "No," he said quietly, "just justice." As the car disappeared into the horizon, the camera of life pulled back over the city, over the skyscrapers, over the house where it all began. Kindness had been mistaken for weakness. Betrayal had been mistaken for victory. But in the end, truth had done the work. And Carter Vance, The man who had once collapsed on the marble floor of his own home now stood taller than he'd ever been, not because he'd destroyed his enemies, but because he'd survived them.